Mass wrestling fan wants to wish everybody a happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I want to share some memories of the African American in my experience as being a keen observer of the pro wrestling scene. Now, the very first pro wrestling match I saw was October 2nd, 1982, at a Capitol Center venue, the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. Now, what was interesting was the very first match on that show was SD Special Delivery Jones versus Baron Shakula. Now, the referee took great pride in checking SD Jones alone for any foreign objects in his elbow pads or knee pads before the match began. And throughout the course of the match, it was apparent that the referee had it in for SD Jones, always making him break on three and allowing Shakula to bend the rules quite liberally. Despite this, Shakula fell victim to a headbutt by SD Jones and was pinned. After the match, the referee, still picking on SD Jones, actually took his hand and put it down the back of SD Jones's trunks, looking for foreign objects. The crowd was very uneasy during all of this, as you could have imagined, and it was apparent that the referee was in fact a racist bastard. So that was my very first wrestling match that I ever saw live. Involved a racist referee angle. Moving forth, I saw SD Jones wrestle many times. He was a tag team partner of Rocky Johnson at the Capitol Center on February 12th, 1983. They defeated Playboy Buddy Rose and Ray the Crippler Stevens. And the funny thing was that they were called the Soul Patrol for that match. Johnson and Jones, before Johnson and Atlas were really a tag team in the WWF just a few months later, Johnson and Jones were actually winning matches at the Capitol Center. When Rocky Johnson started tag teaming with Tony Atlas in 1983, early 83, I was a little sad because I felt that SD Jones was being shoved out of the tag team. Didn't quite understand that at the time. Now we talk about Rocky Johnson. He recently just passed away. And I would like to say that Rocky had a great feud with the magnificent Morocco. And a lot of people thought that Morocco was going to lose the championship to Rocky Johnson, and Rocky would be the first ever African American Intercontinental Champion. Well, that was not the case. Morocco was able to hold on to that title through the Rocky Johnson feud, through the Jimmy Snuka feud, until he lost to Tito Santana. Now, Rocky, however, did get championship gold a few months later, as we know, with Tony Atlas. The Soul Patrol was now Johnson and Atlas, and SD Jones was left out. But when the Johnson and Atlas, two really big guys, very muscular, when they defeated the Wild Samoans, it was apparent that SD Jones would not be part of the tag team anymore, except he did team up with Johnson and Atlas against the Wild Samoans off of Sika and Samala. Samala was the son of Sika, I believe, and was kind of a member of the Samoan family in that generation of the SST later on in his career. Now, over on the other side of things, in reading the wrestling magazines at the time, you had guys like Butch Reed, who seemed to be in Florida, the Mid-South areas. You had guys like Porkchop Cash, Norvell Austin, Coco Beware. But the African American that really caught my attention was none other than Pistol Pez Watley, another wrestler that kind of gets forgotten about with time. But in Georgia Championship Wrestling, he was really kind of making a name for himself as kind of a undercard, mid-card guy. And there was a very special episode of World Championship Wrestling from Georgia where the Junkyard Dog came in as a special guest, I believe, and slapped across the face Pez Watley and demanded that Pez Watley go out there and beat Buzz Sawyer, which he did. So it was kind of an interesting storyline. Look that one up if you can. The Junkyard Dog, Pez Watley, Buzz Sawyer slap. Moving forth, we talk about things like Doom, Ron Simmons, and Butch Reed. They were as far as I can remember, the first WCW World Tag Team Champions of an all African American variety. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. But they broke the color barrier over on the WCW side. That was Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. Managed by a woman, of course, Nancy Benoit, who is no longer with us. Nancy Sullivan at the time. But Butch Reed And actually, they weren't managed by a woman when they won the title. They were managed by Teddy Long. So forgive me, Teddy. I apologize. No, I was man enough to apologize. And Teddy Long has been known to tell some stories about Ole Anderson and Ric Flair. You can look into those stories if you like. Moving forth, the Team of Doom really was a great tag team. They held their own against the likes of the Road Warriors and the Steiners. And Ron Simmons, probably because he was 5 or 6 years younger at least, maybe 10 years younger, than his partner Butch Reed, was get the singles push. And the Ron Simmons-Lex Luger feud tends to get looked over quite a bit. 1991, late 91, Lex Luger was your WCW World Champion. And he was feuding with Ron Simmons, and there was some, believe it or not, racist overtones, similar to what we'd see years later with Booker T and Triple H. The WWE side. So Ron Simmons did not get the title from Lex Luger. They had a great match at Halloween Havoc 91, 2 out of 3 falls. But unfortunately, Ron did not get the belt. However, August 2nd, 1992, a very heralded storyline, Ron Simmons unexpectedly was given a shot at Big Van Vader's WCW World Heavyweight Championship when Jake the Snake Roberts came out during a Nikita Koloff-Rick Rude match. Ended up attacking Sting, who was there to make a save, and Cactus Jack interfered. Great storyline, great storytelling by WCW at the time, and Ron Simmons won the World Championship singles title, which was widely held and regarded as the first ever African-American singles champion of a major wrestling company. But that would be taking a little bit away from Iceman King Parsons. Yes, Iceman King Parsons, who was a crowd favorite in the Texas area, world-class championship wrestling through the heydays of the Von Erichs. But Iceman actually had their singles championship as well, right before the WCCW seceded from the NWA. So Iceman Parsons is kind of a forgotten member of history. We could say the same thing about Bobo Brazil, the WWA, World Wrestling Alliance, I believe it was called. I believe Bobo Brazil had that title many times. You had wrestlers like Sonny King, other great African-American wrestlers throughout the generations. I'm sure I'm forgetting many people. But you can look back through pro wrestling and see that there was a lot of great African-American wrestlers. Maybe they weren't the WWF champion or the NWA champion, but they had championships. And Bobo Brazil, as the WWA champion, is definitely one of them. Now, that night in Baltimore was very significant. One thing that people tend to forget about is that Bill Watts was actually the promoter, the booker at the time. And Bill Watts later had some controversies with some things that he said and was let go at WCW. But under his regime, and I believe Dusty Rhodes was there as well, Ron Simmons to become the champion. Did not have a great title reign, I have to say. He wrestled the Barbarian at Halloween Havoc 1992. Probably a bad move to put the Barbarian in a title match against Ron. And Rick Rude was injured at Starrcade 92, so therefore Ron did not have a real showcase title defense on pay-per-view. And at the time, pay-per-views were only 4 or 5 pay-per-views a year, so Ron kind of got shortchanged. Moving forth, in 1998, we saw The Rock, Rocky Maivia, really come into his own and win the WWF World Heavyweight title in a tournament at Survivor Series 98. Now, at the time, I recall thinking, wow, The Rock is the first ever African-American champion in WWF, but they never really put that over. And we'd see years later that Kofi Kingston, kind of controversial. Some people say that Kofi Kingston was the first champ. Some people say of African Americans with WWE title lineage. Some people say it's The Rock. It's controversial. Perhaps there's a match there. Perhaps there's money to be made with The Rock versus Kofi Kingston. Ahmed Johnson was the first ever U.S. champion. The first ever Intercontinental champion of African American descent. He's kind of a forgotten name, but he defeated Goldust in June of '96. I believe it. Was it the King of the Ring or Survivor Series? But in any event, Ahmed Johnson, who a lot of people don't seem to like, was the first ever African American Intercontinental champion in '96. The Rock would get the title in '97, but you have to give it up to Ahmed. Now, there's been a lot of storylines. Brickhouse Brown and Continental Wrestling, or maybe it's Memphis Wrestling, I should say. Memphis Wrestling had a very the stud stable attacked him. Some storylines have pushed the envelope with what is good taste concerning race, racism, ethnicity. You have to be the judge, wrestling fans. I can't tell you what to think as far as what's good taste, what's bad taste. All I know is that the African-American wrestler has put a lot into the world of professional wrestling. And on Martin Luther King Day, the wrestling fan just wanted to share some memories God bless you all.